Welcome to Habs Unfiltered, episode 263. I'm your host, Blaine Pudney, and I'm joined by a special guest, Byron Bader. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm really excited to have you on. You cover a lot of very interesting information when it comes to prospects in the draft. You cover the analytical side, and I'm not the most math-based person, but it really, really interests me in how you're approaching this. Could you give my listeners a little bit of a background on what you do and how you get it set up?
Yeah, so my website, hockeyprospecting.com, is essentially, a predictive analytics website, basically trying to project prospects and which ones are going to, A, make the NHL, but also B, which ones are going to make the NHL and prosper and do really well, turn into those superstars or those offensive stars that you're kind of looking for from every draft. So essentially what it does is, it uses something called, Nhl Equivalencies, which is basically like every league is a bit different from itself in terms of how the scoring relates back to the NHL. So the OHL is different from college, which is different from all the Euro leagues, and so on and so forth. So basically what it does is it goes back 30 years. So there's 30 years of history in the model, and it sort of uses these equivalencies to basically put everybody on the same level playing field, and then factoring in sort of age and, production growth patterns that sort of have emerged over the last 30 years. You can kind of project out what a player is going to do next, basically, like from the draft, where they're going to kind of go next. A superstar, tends to look a certain way, or a star looks a certain way, and somebody who makes the NHL looks a certain way, compared to somebody that's probably not going to make it, somebody that's going to bust out. So that's basically what it's doing, is it's taking all this information from the past, combining it all, putting it all on the same level playing field and through the same lens, so that you can look at these, hundreds of prospects all at the same time. And you can look at the ones, who has the typical archetype or the typical profile of a player that, turns into a star, like a player like Alex DeBrincat, for example, looked like a player that turns into a star 4 out of 5 times, but he's not taken until the second round because he's kind of small, right? So it's looking for these sort of anomalies, these little, things to catch that are often missed because you're looking at, everything on the same level playing field. So yeah, that's basically what it's doing. And there's a whole bunch of different tools and models at the website. And it's a subscription-based model for people that are curious about signing up. It's $25 a year, and then you get access to all these models and tools that, like I said, go back 30 years. So yeah, that's basically what it's all about.
Yeah, and it's broken down in some easily digestible graphics. So for people like myself who tend to get lost in that block of text, you laid it out in a nice graphic with percentages, and that's what I like about that site.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's you're trying to. This was very niche space even a few years ago, but you're trying to, make this something that people understand. And, a lot of the time they don't need to understand all the math and all the intricacies that go in it. They just need to see, this number good, this number bad. There's some stuff in there that if they want to get into it, they can get more into it. It shows their equivalencies and how it's kind of grown each year. And a lot of people are interested in that, but sometimes, people are just kind of, they just want to see, like, what does my team have in the system? Who did we just draft? Did we get somebody that has a good likelihood of being really good, or did we get somebody that, could be a dud, or could be somebody that underperforms a draft spot, right? So yeah, that's really kind of the goal and what I'm trying to achieve. And yeah, so I appreciate that. That's resonating with you for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Now, when the draft is all said and done every year, do you go back over the information that you've been using as a data point and kind of reassess and fine tune?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a couple of years because it takes so long for basically like a prospect to make it. I mean, the typical, path is like 5 to 6 years for a forward before you can kind of be pretty certain whether they're going to make it or not, or maybe they just kind of sneak in. And then for a defenseman, it's probably 6 to 7 years. And then for goalies, you're probably at like 8 to 9 years, right? So it takes a while. So, I mean, I kind of go back every couple of years and I, add a little bit more data to it and sort of tweak the model to make sure, like, those certain groupings or those certain profiles that said, hey, this is a good profile for a star, or stars tend to come from this sort of grouping, or these certain equivalencies at certain ages. And I kind of go back, and that'll tweak a little bit as you kind of look at it and go along. But they're pretty consistent. They basically existed. I mean, the data goes back to 1990, and these patterns have always sort of been there. And they tweak a little bit, but I mean, they're pretty consistent, like over the decades, once you kind of error adjust everything. And so I mean, there'll be little changes, but so far it doesn't change too much as you go. But yeah.
Well, I mean, the more data, the better. So
yeah.
that helps with future predictions. Now, did the pandemic affect the model at all?
Yeah, I mean, it affected it. I'd say the biggest thing was, you certainly get these small sample sizes, which is very atypical. Prior you'd get, you want to see like basically the player playing like at least 20 games in that league. Hopefully something kind of north of 30 or 40 games. That's typically what you do see, unless the player got injured, basically, is when you see a small sample size. But what happened with COVID is you had all these shutdowns and players not being able to play, that there was kind of this blanket small sample size and this blanket weirdness going on. So it did play with the model, and I'm curious to go back and look in 5 years and see like what happened there. Like, is there some players that maybe snuck through that turned into stars that basically don't look like it in the model because they didn't have any data associated with them, or they performed badly in their small game sample that I was able to use? There might be some stuff that pops up like that, but kind of the only, I guess, good thing about the pandemic is it basically happened to everybody. So, I mean, it's not just like this player over here, or this player over here. Like, it's, all the WHL players only got in, 24 games. All the OHL guys didn't even get to play, and then so it's all kind of, spread across the entire cohort, or the whole prospect pool kind of coming up. So that's one part about it, that, at least it's not like this person over here and then this person over here. It's kind of a blanket thing. But yeah, I'm certain that it'll have some weird impacts when I go back and look at it in a few years, for sure.
Now, in looking at the prospects that are coming up to draft now, because they miss so many games, they miss seasons, most of the people that I've been talking to have just kind of been saying, well, their progression is going to be a little bit slower, but they'll still get to where they were at. So I would be interested to see if that, like you say, it's 4 to 5 years for a forward. Maybe it takes a 6th year, or, you add a year to your model. Maybe that's what it is. I'd be really interested to see that.
Yeah, like I think that'll be the case. And I think, not only will it take them a bit longer to get there, but like you'll have, these players that maybe would have kind of barely crossed over sort of my star threshold, my star offensive producer threshold. In a typical non-pandemic situation, maybe they would have gotten there and they would have crossed over. But in this situation, I could see it like where they're a bit back of it, like they kind of get to where they're supposed to go, but like they never achieve that true star status because they're always kind of a little bit back. And, the huge thing with this model is how age is so important. Like, you could have a 6-month difference between prospects that basically look identical, coming up in the draft. And that's a massive difference. The guy who's born in the summer versus the one who's kind of born in like, November, December of the previous year, like that could make a big impact. And the big thing with it is, the earlier you're sort of hitting these big jumps and hitting these big equivalencies, the better. Whereas some of these players, like, that really early stage, like basically hitting a massive equivalency by age 18 or 19, like that's wiped out for them. They can't do that anymore. So they kind of have to, even if they're hitting those big jumps later on, what the research shows is they're less likely to sort of turn into those big, superstars, those big stars. So there might be some of that happening as well. So it'll be kind of interesting for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Now you use the NHL equivalencies. How much of that, what kind of weight system is it using with these international tournaments?
So with the tournaments, I don't tend to focus on them because they're often really small game samples, again, which is not good for this type of stuff. And like, a lot of times they play in a bunch of different tournaments. So then it's basically like a whole bunch of little small game samples balled up into one, but you basically have to split them apart. So basically what I do is most of the time the player plays in one league and you can kind of just grab that equivalency and it works great. With some of the Euro guys, what I do is, because they'll jump around a bit, especially like the Russian guys and the Swedish guys, especially, like they'll go from like the junior league up into the major league and then the one in between, and we'll kind of go all over the place. And so long as they kind of play enough in each league, call it 20 games type thing, I'll take basically like where they looked best, and I'll kind of use that universally throughout the model. So, if they played in the KHL, but they also played in the MHL, and, their KHL stats were basically non-existent because they're playing, 2 minutes a night like Yurov, but then their MHL stats are like fantastic, I'll basically take, he's showing better in the MHL, so I'll take that. And, I use it universally throughout the model. So it's not like I'm picking and choosing. It's kind of like apples to apples that way. So yeah, that's what I kind of do with the leagues. And then in terms of the international play, like normally I don't really factor it in. It's just kind of like a nice anecdotal thing. Like, oh, look at this guy destroying the world championships or the world juniors or that type of thing. It tends to be a lot of the time, the good players are the ones dominating these tournaments, but then sometimes you have these like strange anomalies like Slafkovsky this year, like Payarvi, not that Payarvi looked bad per se, or Slafkovsky looks bad, they don't look like certain superstars going into the draft, but they have these massive tournaments that people are like, oh my God, like this is the next big thing. But it's like weird, 10 game samples. So I kind of, for the model purposes, I mostly ignore them. They're nice to look up, but for factoring it into the actual model, they're not in.
And now I'm looking at your first round list that you have put out on Twitter. And for those who would go to your Twitter account and find your hockey prospecting 2022 NHL draft rankings, you have it listed in a color scheme from blue to red. So are you setting them up as their score?
They're not tiers or anything. It's basically just going like, it literally goes from dark blue to red just to kind of show like this is the top one down to the bottom one. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there's different people that group them and stuff. I didn't particularly with this. It's just basically just guiding your eyes essentially.
Now, in looking at your list, I noticed very, very interesting anomalies from other people's lists.
Yeah.
Like most, you have Shane Wright at first, Logan Cooley's up high, but the ones that really popped for me were Lane Hudson and Yurov Slafkovsky. You got Lane at number 8 and Slafkovsky at 16. Can you explain a little bit as to why you felt that Slafkovsky belonged at the midpoint?
Right. And yeah, just a clarification about the list. Like, this isn't where I think players are actually going to go. This is just essentially rankings from, my models and factoring in kind of, their consensus ranking and then their age. So how much runway they have left to sort of hit those next steps after being drafted, because that's a big thing too, is basically where they're going next. So just wanted to throw that out there first. But yeah, so essentially, I can start with Slafkovsky. So obviously he's kind of consensus ranked like 2 or 3 type thing with most sources. And then, so like, I'm basically like almost completely data driven with this. And when you look at Slafkovsky and where he sort of stands right now as of the draft, he doesn't have this, star or superstar profile to him at all. This can grow, obviously, because I track him for 5 years, so he still kind of has 3 more years to go, basically. But a lot of these guys going in the draft, like, they have this profile that looks like, oh yeah, this guy has like already a 70-80% chance that he's going to be a star. Like, obviously, this guy looks like a first overall talent type thing, but Slafkovsky doesn't really have that. He's not old, but he's not young either. He's kind of right in that gray area. He's born March 30th. So, there's some runway there, but it's not as much as like a guy born like in the summer. And he kind of has this, slightly above average equivalency going into the draft. It's in the 20s, essentially. And the other thing is that's coming from a small game sample in the junior league. That's where he showed best, right? And if you actually factor in his Liga totals, so he's playing in the Pro Liga league, I think he has like 10 points in 31 games. So if you translate that, it translates to like an equivalency in like the teens, which is really, really low for like a first rounder. But for like a top 5 pick, it's very, very low. So it kind of red flags me. And when you kind of go through, you know, I read through the scouting reports and watch video. You know, I'm not a scout myself, but I read through them myself because obviously there's smart people out there that scout these guys and go through it. And you go through and they don't talk about him like, oh, he just like he's about to pop and he's about to hit this like superstar level. You know, they talk about how he's really good at like dominating down low and getting back out front. And then they compare him to players, you know, like Nishushkin or PRV. And those are really good players, like analytics darlings, like they kind of drive the play all over the ice. But if you did like a redraft of like 2013 or 2016, like those guys would not be in the top 3. Even now, like if you had hindsight going back 5 years and 8 years, like they're not in there. So that's kind of what he looks like to me. So that's why I can't rank him that high, because there's just so much good, you know, high probability stuff that's above him that I just can't have him in the top 3 or even the top 10, like right around like 15, 16, you know, the really high caliber guys are not there anymore. And that's where it's like, okay, like this guy has the tools, he's big, he's strong, you know, he can protect the puck. That's where you kind of take a swing on a guy like that. And so that's basically why I have him ranked there. And then Lane Hutson, so he's, you know, a 5'8" defenseman out of the USDP program, very, very small. He's absolutely tiny. But you look at what he looks like in the model, and he's got this really, really high production in the USDP this year. And he also had really good production in his pre-draft year last year, which I look for too. Like that's, you know, it's a great sign if they have great production in the draft year, but if they also have kind of like 90th percentile production normalized, you know, when it's all in that same level playing field in their pre-draft year, like that's even better. And Hudson has that. And he's got this crazy production. Like he looks like almost like like in the model, he looks kind of like a Quinn Hughes light version, not quite as good, but like not that far behind him. And I know, you know, Quinn Hughes is an amazing skater and Lane Hutson is not quite as amazing, but yeah, I mean, he has the profile of a player that can do well. The big thing about him is how small he is. Like essentially,
Ironically.
yeah. If he does turn into a star, like he kind of has a star profile in the model. If he does turn into the star, he'd be basically like the shortest star defenseman to like ever come out, like certainly in the last 30 or 40 years. So that's a bit of a red flag. That's a bit of a concern. But I mean, if he was like probably 3 inches taller, he'd probably be a lock for top 15. If he was 4 inches taller, he'd probably be in the top 10. So will that size really play a factor? It's tough to tell. I mean, he's very, very small. He's very slight. Like he's only like 150 pounds. He's going to have to put on a whole bunch of weight, but he's not, it's not like he's knocking on the door of making the NHL. Like he's at least 2 or 3 years out. You know, hopefully once he gets with a team, they can put him with a strength coach and he can put on some pounds and that type of thing. So that's why he's ranked so high. It might seem absolutely nuts, but he has this like really high like outlier production. Like he's in like the 99th percentile for his sort of equivalency as a D-man for this draft. He's basically only behind Nemitz. So yeah, that's why I had to rank him so high.
Yeah, and if he was 5'10" versus 5'8", I mean, how much more different could that possibly be for him? I mean, really?
Yeah, exactly. Like I tweeted about this yesterday, like, you know, comparing him to Hughes, and, you know, Hughes is one of the best, you know, offensive D-men of his generation. So maybe he's not quite that, but, you know, he could certainly still be a star. And yeah, Quinn Hughes is 5'10", like 180 pounds. And then Lane Hutson is 5'8" and like 150 pounds. Like these guys are small D-men. They're going to get pushed around. They're going to have like no physicality to their game. They're going to have to rely on, you know, moving the puck quickly and using their feet and, you know, using their hockey IQ to sort of create gaps and create space so that they can get it out. They're not going to be, you know, crushing guys into the boards. They're not going to be boxing you out in front of the net. That's not who they are. So 5'8" or 5'10", like you're short. You're a short D-man. You're going to have to work around a different way. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process. You know, he looks like a guy that could be a star. He's just really, really short.
So you've seen many drafts. he looks like he's going to be one of those guys that slides. How far do you think he'll slide back? Do you think he'll slide out of the first?
Yeah, yeah, he's that small that I think he will. I mean, you look at last year. I mean, it's weird COVID year again, but like a guy like Olin Zellweger, he slides out of the first round. He looks very similar. He's a bit taller, but I mean, he's kind of that really small puck moving defenseman. Now, yeah, this amazing year, and he's kind of really, shot up the rankings and that type of thing. But he still slid out, and they're going to look at Hudson. I mean, they're starting to draft shorter players higher now. You're not seeing it where these obvious superstar talents like Theo Fleury and Marty St. Louis are dropping out of the entire draft or dropping in the sixth round. They're getting drafted sometimes in the first round, second, third, rather than the back end now. But defensemen this size, they're still going to drop at this point. They haven't come around too much on them yet. So, I think he's probably going to drop to maybe middle of the second round. I was guessing somewhere around that kind of 45, 50 spot, maybe even late second, third round. But I mean, he has essentially first round numbers or even top 10, top 15 numbers. So I'm curious where he goes for sure.
Yeah, he's one of those players that I've been watching in this draft class that really intrigue me. I want to see how he does against the larger opponents. I mean, he's done extremely well at the USHL level, playing against NCAA players. But those aren't quite professional levels. So I really want to see how he deals.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it'll be interesting. Like it might take some adjusting, and it could be something even where if he does make the NHL, like it takes him a little bit to sort of get his footing and figure out, what he's supposed to be doing or how he's supposed to have success before he really starts cooking. I mean, but you've seen some of these guys like Quinn Hughes came in, had immediate success. Like even a guy like Sam Girard who came in a few years ago, he had some pretty decent success out of the gates. He's another small guy. And then, 2 or 3 years after that, he kind of took another bump up, and now he's really figured out how to play his game and generate offense and that type of thing. So it could be a situation like that, but I don't know. I think he'll find a way. These types of players, I mean, they turn into stars 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 times. Like, yeah, he's really, really small. That's the big thing. But he certainly has the very elite profile that you want to be looking for in these drafts for sure, where you get that sneaky ad.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those home run swing kind of picks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now back to Slafkovsky. You mentioned a couple of red flags with him. Do you feel like he's going to slide anywhere past the second place beyond New Jersey, or are they really going to rely on that size?
I don't know. I mean, if you look at New Jersey and how they've drafted recently, they tend to take like the high offensive guys, or like the guys that essentially show well in this model. Like, I don't know whether they sign up or not, but they probably have something that they're looking at. But, you look at like Jack Hughes, obvious pick. He's sure, pretty obvious. But then they take like Ty Smith, and they take Alexander Holtz, and then they take Luke Hughes last year. Like they tending to take that offensive one that, is showing that potential already. So then to go and change that and basically take essentially, a very opposite approach with taking Slafkovsky at second. I don't know. I could see him maybe sliding almost surprisingly back to like third or fourth or something, or maybe New Jersey trades out of that pick or something because it's just too high to take that type of player. But it is a player that would help them. I mean, they're pretty small. They're a growing group. They're offensively talented, but they could probably use a couple bigger bodies that can kind of, play the wall and get the puck for them down low and stuff. So he is the type of player that could work for them. But yeah, like just at second, I don't know, it might be too rich, but we'll see. I mean, that's where he's kind of slotted right now. That's sort of the consensus. So maybe they just walk up there and take him. So
could be why they've put their pick out, dangling it for a known player, a known commodity.
Yeah.
So maybe they are subscribers.
Yeah, maybe.
I was going somewhere with this. Sailor Brain. Yeah, so he's, I don't know. I don't feel like he's the right type of gamble that someone that high should take. Like there's a big debate with the Canadians where they should take either him or Shane Wright, whereas I've been kind of pointing towards Logan Cooley and Shane Wright. Now, how close in the model would Cooley and Wright be?
Yeah, so they're quite close, I would say. And I mean, Wright is obviously a bit funny because he's, been talked about as this first overall pick for a while, and he kind of looks the part. Could be a 1C for, the next 15 years type thing, but he missed his entire pre-draft year because of the OHL. So he's basically sitting out for 18 months, but he showed early indications of sort of this like really good talent, like even with his equivalency in his kind of D-2 year. So when he was 15, 16 playing in the OHL, like not many players have numbers like that. Like it's like a Stamkos, Hall, Austin Matthews, Crosby, McDavid type thing. Like, so you're showing these like really high potential numbers then, and then he basically has to sit for 18 months and then it takes him a bit going. So I still have him at first and he still looks really good, but he looks a little bit weird because he missed his entire pre-draft year. And then Cooley looks really good, had really good production in the USDP last year and then jumped up another level this year in the USDP. And he's also quite a bit younger. He's born in May versus Shane Wright, who's kind of born in the early part of January. So that's the big difference, is he has a bit more runway to sort of pop and hit that really high level sort of growth pattern compared to Wright, but they're very, very close. I mean, I could kind of do a pick 'em between the two of them. I like both a lot. They're ranked one and 3 by me, so for sure.
Now, there's one player that it wasn't just COVID that caused them problems. It was a health issue. So Miranda Shenko, you have him in the first, but down towards about 25, 26. Where was he trending before he got ill?
Yeah, so if you look at his numbers from essentially his pre-draft year, like they're quite good. They look like, because he's an older prospect born in February. They look like a guy, if he took another jump in his draft year, they look like a guy that would kind of go in the sort of early teens, I would say. Maybe a bit earlier than that, because maybe that was kind of his consensus. Like, there was a lot of people talking about him. So he might have been one of those guys that snuck in the top 10. But obviously it seems like, his health concerns there sort of impacted this season, because he kind of, what happened with the numbers before, the health prognosis came down, as he sort of plateaued. Like he was at a really good number in his pre-draft year and he's basically at the same number in his draft year, which is not what you want to see. You want to see them making the jump to the next sort of threshold or the next level. And he sort of plateaued, but now, yeah, you're getting this news that he's got these pretty serious health concerns that maybe have deterred him from hitting that next level. But yeah, I'd say he probably would have, I think he's probably going to fall to maybe the 20s now, but he probably would have been drafted in like the early teens, I would guess, prior.
All right. And with the model, do you have a way of kind of assessing the talent floor for these players, or is this just to project out to see if they can be stars or just NHL players?
Yeah, it's mostly the NHL. Like, do they make the NHL and play 200 games essentially, or do they turn into basically like a star offensive producer? So it doesn't really have the floor and ceiling like that. Like that, you kind of more rely on the scouting and the draft consensus. If a guy in the model kind of looks like Slafkovsky, looks, middling or a bit average, but everybody talks about him as like a top 3 pick. Well, obviously, like this guy's enormous. He's going to make the NHL. He's going to play his 200 games. So his floor is probably like making the NHL for sure and being a bottom sixer that, does a role, right? Whereas his ceiling could be, a guy that slots onto a wing with a really good playmaker maybe, and maybe turns into a star that way. So it's my model's tougher to sort of look at the ceiling and floor. I mean, you can kind of see it when you're looking at players, looking at, the whole kind of grouping of players that look like player X, and you say, oh, okay, like there's 20 guys that look exactly like this over the past 30 years. And, 15 of them turned into stars. And then the other ones just barely missed being a star, but they all made the NHL. So basically that's what you're looking at. Or you could be looking at a guy where it's like, oh, like 80% of these guys make the NHL, but like only 2 out of 20 turn into stars. So, I mean, you're probably looking at more of a role player there. So
Now, I know it's an inexact science because you're doing a predictive model and sometimes there's misses. For instance, Nhl Yakupov, like his numbers looked unbelievable.
Yeah.
So is there an answer into why he missed in yours, or is it just one of those strange anomalies?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's all sorts of stuff with Yakupov. Like, kind of heard that he was maybe the hockey IQ wasn't there. Like he wasn't. But the other thing is like he's a Russian and like spoke barely any English. I don't think they ever really had a translator or anything for him. So like, he's coming over to a new country trying to learn this game on this team that's not very good, but you're trying to rapidly improve, and he kind of doesn't really know what's going on. So that could be part of it. I mean, you have that sometimes with these big Euros, especially from Russia, that look great in the model and then they just never pan out because there might be some language barriers. And with some of them, I mean, not in Yakupov's case, but some of them, like maybe they stay here for a couple of years and then it's maybe like, oh, maybe we'll bump you down to the AHL. And then it's like, well, no, I'm just going to go back to the KHL and make 500 grand and be back in my home country. Right. So yeah, with Yakupov, I don't know. Like he's drafted first overall. He has the exact profile of like a player that turns into a star. And even like his first year in the NHL, I know the Oilers were pretty terrible at that point. They were basically just like trying to get him going. But he had a really good like rookie year. He had a rookie year indicative of a guy who's drafted first overall and makes the NHL right away and then becomes into a star. And then right after that, it just all fell apart. So I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but yeah, he's a really interesting one for sure.
Probably that Edmonton first overall curse.
Yeah, exactly. They got too many of them.
Oh, God, no kidding. Now you're based out of Alberta, so you're going to be more of an honest broker in this. If you were the Canadiens GM, who would you want to pick for the team that they have now?
At first overall?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would take Shane Wright. I mean, you need a lot of pieces in Montreal. It's going to be a while. He's being the consensus number one. You already have Suzuki, but kind of when you read about Shane Wright, like the offense is there and it's kind of, he looks pretty good in the model, but like he's also like, they talk about how good he is defensively. Like he's not cheating the game. He's not one of these guys where it's all offense, but then you're not seeing like the superstar profile in the model. Like, he's highly regarded for his defensive side. So, I mean, even if his ceiling or what he hits is kind of like a 60.2C or a kind of a shutdown center, I mean, you have him and Suzuki. I think that would be a pretty good combo. And kind of the upside with Shane Wright, if you let him go back to the OHL and develop a little bit more, maybe you end up with that 1C sort of 70 to 80 point guy. And then you kind of have a 1-2 between him and Suzuki. I think that would be fantastic. I mean, but like I said, like they obviously need everything. They need the elite D-man, like a Nemitz, or a Matachuk. They need the wingers, but they certainly need to start with basically the center of the D-man. So I would go with Wright for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta set up your team with the best centers you can get. I mean, I think the St. Louis Blues were probably the only team I can think of that didn't win a cup, or that won a cup with just really good centers as opposed to elite.
Yeah. And like when they first got O'Reilly, like that was kind of like, I mean, he was really good at that point, but that was like right as he was really starting to pop and kind of evolve into a star. It was like basically that season. And then after that, he's just kind of taken off. And now he is, certainly probably one of the top 5 centers in the league. But yeah, like that's when you go back and you look at, especially the teams that make it to the finals and make it to winning a Stanley Cup, they always have a ton of stars. 4 or 5 is kind of the average, much more than most other teams. And they always have like a dominating, top 5 center and a really, really good D-man that's like a massive point producer and plays 25 minutes a night. Like that's kind of the anchor points that you need. And then you need to fill it in with a lot more stars. So yeah, I think they start with Shane Wright for sure.
Now, before I let you go, I have one very, very important question, and it's because you're in Alberta. Did the Battle of Alberta cause any problems at home?
It's probably a bit too much swearing for me, for the kids going to bed and that type of thing. But I mean, my wife is also from essentially Calgary as well. She's from a little small farm area just outside Calgary. So thankfully, we're both Calgary fans, and then all three kids are Calgary fans too. So there was no upheaval that way. But yeah, it was certainly a lot of disappointment on my side, seeing how that went. But
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I understand disappointment. The team I follow hasn't won anything in about 30 years, so I get it.
Coming up on it. Yeah, 29.
Yeah, I know. It's the last time they won was the year I joined the armed forces, so I'm hoping they win before I retire.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's how it'll line up. It'll be kind of anchor points when you start and when you end.
It's my fault.
Yeah, I think so. You need to retire like right now so they can win it next year.
Well, if people start sending me money, I will do it.
There you go. That's all you need.
So,
request.
Yeah, just send me free cash, people. I'll quit. So why don't you just let my listeners know where they can find you and how they can subscribe?
Yeah, so the website is hockeyprospecting.com. And like I mentioned before, it's $25 subscription per year. And then that gets you access to all the tools. There's about 10 different tools in there to compare teams and prospects and goalies and all that type of stuff. And it goes back all the way to 1990. So there's essentially, I think, about 7,000 players in there to compare and contrast. And then, my Twitter handle is Byron M. Bader, at Byron M. Bader. And I post different stuff about the draft coming up and about different prospects. And then, guys like Slafkovsky. And then I get into heavy debates with people angry with me and that type of thing. So that's where you can follow me and ask me any questions there.
I got to admit, it's been very entertaining to watch these threads evolve. It's unreal.
Yeah, they're getting better and better by the day.
I'm just waiting for the best chirps. I want to take some of these chirps so I can use when I go play men's league hockey.
Exactly. Yeah. There's some good stuff in there.
Oh yeah, they're very creative. But I really want to thank you for coming on the episode and talking about this. It's like I said at the start, it's a really interesting approach with the analytics, and it just fascinates me to learn these points of view, because everyone's arguing about analytics versus eye tests, whereas I'm one of these people that believe they need to work together, and this is one of those tools that have really helped me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big believer in using both. Like, I always say, people ask me, oh, can this replace scouting? And I say, no, it's complementary to scouting. Like, basically this provides you, a sign of, oh, go look at these 50 players because they look really good. And then the scouts can come back and, they say, oh, I don't like this player or this player because they have a bad attitude or bad character or whatever. And just, scouting signs that they might bust. And then it helps you kind of narrow in on the player that you want. So yeah, it's a very complementary thing. And I certainly believe in both the eye tests and the analytics as well.
Again, thank you very much for coming on the show and discussing this with me. I know you're busy, so I appreciate the time you've given me. And for my listeners, thank you guys for listening. Be sure to check out Byron and check out all of his work at the website. I use it. You should too. And remember, if you're talking about it, so are we.